was one of those nights where the sky seemed to split open with rage. Thunder roared like a beast, shaking the walls of our small house, while lightning illuminated the cracks in the ceiling that had been there for years but never fixed. The air smelled damp and heavy, carrying the weight of something ominous, something I couldn't quite put my finger on yet. Dad had just come home late from another grueling day at work, his face lined with exhaustion, his clothes soaked through from running between jobs. He barely made it inside before Mom started screaming. "You think this is life? This misery?" she yelled, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. Her hands trembled as she gestured wildly around the room, at the peeling wallpaper, the broken chair we'd patched up with duct tape, the empty shelves where food should have been. "I can't do this anymore. I won't live like some beggar scraping by." Her words hit me like punches, each syllable heavier than the last. I stood frozen in the doorway, clutching the edge of the table for support, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. My little brother, Ollie, sat huddled in the corner, clutching his stuffed bear, tears streaming down his chubby cheeks. He didn't understand what was happening. He was only 2, but even he could feel the storm brewing in our home. Dad tried to calm her down, his voice soft but strained. "Melissa, please, we'll figure it out. We always do." But she wasn't listening. Her eyes burned with fury, her lips curled into a sneer that made her look almost unrecognizable. Without warning, she grabbed the picture frame sitting on the mantel, a photo of all 4 of us taken years ago when things were still okay, and hurled it to the floor. The glass shattered into jagged pieces, reflecting the harsh light of the flickering bulb above. For a moment, no one moved. Then she turned to Dad, her voice dripping with venom. "I'm done. I'm leaving. And don't you dare try to stop me." That's when everything fell apart. Before anyone could react, she stormed toward the door, pulling her suitcase behind her like it weighed nothing compared to the burden she was leaving behind. Panic surged through me, hot and suffocating. I ran after her, my bare feet slapping against the cold wooden floor. "Mommy, wait!" I screamed, my voice breaking. Outside, the rain poured down in sheets, soaking me instantly as I stumbled onto the porch. "Please don't go," I begged, grabbing hold of her leg. She looked down at me, her expression cold and distant, like I was a stranger instead of her own son. "Let go," she snapped, prying my fingers off her. When I refused, clinging tighter, she shoved me away so hard I fell backward into a puddle. Water splashed up around me, mixing with the tears streaming down my face. "Nate!" Dad shouted from the doorway, rushing out to help me, but I barely noticed. All I could see was her walking away, disappearing into the darkness without a single glance back. Over the sound of the rain, I heard her final words, spoken not with anger but with indifference. "I don't need you." Those 5 words echoed in my head long after she was gone, cutting deeper than any knife ever could. They stayed with me through sleepless nights, through countless mornings waking up hungry because there wasn't enough food, through every taunt at school about how my mom didn't love me enough to stay. And then there was Ollie. Poor Ollie, who cried himself to sleep calling for a mother he barely remembered. Who grew up thinking love was something conditional, something you had to earn. I promised myself I'd protect him no matter what. But deep down I knew I'd already failed him once by letting her leave. The rain kept falling, washing away her footprints but not the scars she left behind. The rain eventually stopped that night, but the storm inside our home never did. The days that followed were a blur of exhaustion and despair. Dad didn't say much after Mom left. He just worked harder, as if punishing himself for failing to keep her here. He took on 3 jobs at once: construction during the day, cleaning offices late into the night, and odd handyman gigs whenever he could squeeze them in. His body wasn't built for this kind of punishment though. I'd often wake up in the middle of the night to find him sitting at the kitchen table, his head buried in his hands, too tired to even eat the stale bread we had left over from dinner. But it wasn't just Dad who was suffering. Ollie, who used to laugh so easily, now cried almost every night. He missed Mom even though he barely remembered her face. One evening, while I was trying to coax him into eating a bowl of watery soup, he looked up at me with those big, innocent eyes and asked, "Brother Nate, who is Mom?" The spoon slipped from my hand, clattering against the chipped ceramic bowl. My throat tightened like someone had wrapped an invisible hand around it. How do you explain abandonment to a child? How do you tell your little brother that the person who gave birth to him walked away without looking back? Instead of answering, I forced a smile, one that probably looked more like a grimace, and ruffled his hair. "Eat up, buddy. This is really good." He stared at me for a moment longer before shrugging and going back to his soup. But I couldn't shake off the question. It lingered in my mind like a splinter I couldn't pull out, throbbing painfully whenever I thought about it. Things got worse when Dad collapsed one morning. I found him slumped against the bathroom sink, pale and trembling, muttering something about dizziness. The hospital bill drained what little savings we had left, leaving us with nothing but debt and empty cupboards. That's when I made the decision to drop out of school. I was only 8 years old, but I knew there was no other choice. Someone had to take care of Ollie while Dad recovered, or rather tried to recover. Life became a series of sleepless nights and endless chores. I learned how to stretch a single loaf of bread across 3 meals, how to patch holes in our clothes with scraps of fabric, and how to haggle at the market for cheaper vegetables. At night, after tucking Ollie into bed, I'd sit by the window staring out at the dark streets, wondering where she was living now, eating fine dinners and wearing fancy clothes while we struggled to survive. Then came the day I discovered the letter. It happened by accident. I was searching through Dad's old toolbox, looking for nails to fix a loose floorboard, when a crumpled piece of paper fell out. Curiosity got the better of me and I unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was unmistakably hers, each word sharp and deliberate. "Jonathan, don't look for me. I have my own life now and I don't want to be tied down by you or those kids anymore. You were never enough for me and neither were they." My hands shook as I read it over and over again, the words burning into my brain like acid. She hadn't left because of poverty or hardship. She'd left because she didn't care about any of us. Anger surged through me, hot and uncontrollable. Without thinking, I grabbed the nearest matchbox and lit the letter on fire, watching it curl and blacken until nothing remained but ashes. I clenched my fists so tightly that my nails dug into my palms, drawing blood. "If you ever come back," I whispered to the empty room, "I'll make sure you regret it." From that moment on, I stopped thinking of her as my mother. She was just another burden we'd managed to shed, a ghost whose memory haunted us but whom we no longer owed anything to. Ollie depended on me completely, trusting me in a way that both warmed my heart and terrified me. Every time he smiled at me, every time he called me brother, it reminded me why I couldn't afford to break down. I had to be strong, for him, for Dad, for all of us. Even if it meant growing up faster than anyone should. It had been 9 years since the night she walked out, leaving behind shattered glass and broken hearts. 9 years of scraping by, of growing up too fast, of learning to survive without her. I thought I'd buried her memory deep enough that it could never resurface. But life has a cruel way of reminding you that wounds don't heal, they just scab over until something rips them open again. The knock on the door came on an ordinary evening, one of those quiet moments when Ollie was coloring at the kitchen table and Dad was dozing off in his armchair. The sound startled me, sharp, insistent, like it demanded attention. For a fleeting second, I wondered if it was a neighbor or maybe someone selling something. Then I opened the door and my blood ran cold. There she stood, dressed in a sleek black dress that hugged her figure, diamonds glittering on her fingers and around her neck. Her hair was perfectly styled, her makeup flawless, and she wore heels so high they made her tower over me. She smiled, a practiced, polished smile that didn't reach her eyes, and said, "Nate, I'm back. Let's start over." For a moment I couldn't breathe. My chest tightened and my vision blurred with a mix of rage and disbelief. How dare she? After all these years, after abandoning us, after everything she put us through, how dare she come back acting like nothing happened? Without hesitation, I slammed the door shut. The sound echoed through the house, jolting Dad awake. He blinked blearily, confusion etched across his face. "What was that?" "It's her," I spat, my voice trembling with anger. Before I could stop him, Dad got up and opened the door. Of course he did. He was always too weak, too forgiving. Too desperate for some semblance of family, even if it meant letting her waltz back into our lives as if she belonged here. She stepped inside, her presence immediately filling the room like smoke, choking, suffocating. Behind her trailed a man I assumed was Brad, her boyfriend. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with slicked-back hair and a smirk that made my skin crawl. His gaze swept over the room dismissively before landing on Ollie, who shrank back instinctively. "Hey there, little guy," Brad said, reaching out as if to ruffle Ollie's hair. But Ollie flinched, pulling away and clutching his crayons tightly. "Don't touch him," I snapped, stepping between them. Brad raised his hands mockingly. "Easy, kid. Just trying to be friendly." Friendly my ass. There was nothing friendly about the way his eyes lingered on our furniture, our walls, our belongings, as if mentally appraising their worth. And then there was her, standing there like she owned the place, pretending to care while barely sparing Ollie a glance. Dad tried to lighten the mood, offering tea and awkward small talk. But I couldn't focus on any of it. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to throw her out, to make her leave the same way she left us, with nothing but shame. Instead, I retreated to my room, slamming the door behind me. That night I couldn't sleep. Something felt off. Around midnight, I heard faint footsteps in the hallway. Curious and suspicious, I crept out of bed and followed the sound. It led me to Dad's study where the safe was kept. The door was slightly ajar, and through the crack I saw her crouched in front of the safe, fiddling with the dial. My heart pounded. What the hell was she doing? Did she really think she could just waltz back in and take whatever she wanted? I clenched my fists, torn between confronting her and gathering more evidence. In the end, I chose the latter, snapping a quick photo with my phone before retreating silently to my room. The next morning, I confronted Dad. Did you know she's after your money? He looked at me, his expression pained. Nate, give her a chance. People change. Not her, I shot back. She hasn't changed. She's still the same selfish, manipulative person who left us. Can't you see that? But he refused to listen. He was blinded by hope, by the fantasy of having a complete family again. Meanwhile, I burned with determination. She thought she could destroy us once, she was wrong. This time I'd fight back. The days that followed her return were a slow unraveling of everything I thought I knew about trust. She wasn't just back to start over. She was here for something far more calculated, far more sinister. Every move she made confirmed my worst fears. She hadn't changed, not one bit. And worse, she had brought Brad with her, a man who seemed to embody every toxic trait imaginable. Together, they were like two predators circling their prey, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. It started subtly at first. One afternoon, as Ollie and I sat at the kitchen table doing homework, she walked in holding an expensive-looking handbag. Her eyes scanned the room lazily before landing on Ollie's schoolbooks. "Do you really need all these lessons?" she asked casually, her tone dripping with disdain. "They're costing too much." Ollie froze, his pencil hovering mid-air. "But Mom, don't call me that," she snapped, cutting him off. Then, softer but no less dismissive, she added, "We can find cheaper options." I stared at her, rage bubbling beneath the surface. Cheaper options? This wasn't about saving money, it was about prioritizing her own indulgences over her son's education. The next day, I saw her flaunting a new designer scarf, the kind that probably cost more than a month's worth of groceries. Meanwhile, Ollie's tutoring sessions were cancelled without explanation. But that wasn't the worst of it. A few nights later, I woke up to muffled shouting coming from the living room. Creeping out of bed, I peeked around the corner and saw Brad towering over her, his face twisted with anger. In his hand was a half-empty bottle of whiskey, its contents sloshing dangerously as he waved it around. "You said this would be easy," he barked, his voice slurred. "But your old man is still breathing and we've got nothing yet." Her response was barely audible, her voice trembling, not from fear, I realized later, but from calculation. "Patience, Brad. It'll happen soon enough." Then, faster than I could process, his fist connected with her jaw. She stumbled backward, clutching her face, but instead of fighting back or leaving, she simply stood there, silent. When he grabbed her arm roughly and pulled her close, whispering something I couldn't hear, she nodded obediently. My stomach churned. How could she let him treat her like that? But then it hit me, this wasn't about love or loyalty. It was about power, about using each other to get what they wanted. And what they wanted was us. Our home. Dad's life savings. Everything. The final straw came when I caught her selling Grandma's jewelry. I'd been avoiding her as much as possible, retreating to my room whenever she was around, but curiosity got the better of me one evening. I heard her talking on the phone in hushed tones, so I lingered outside her bedroom door. Through the crack, I saw her pulling open a small wooden box, the same one Grandma had given Dad years ago. Inside were rings, necklaces, and brooches, pieces that held sentimental value far beyond their monetary worth. "I'll bring them tomorrow," she said into the receiver, her voice smooth and businesslike. "Make sure you give me a good price." My hands clenched into fists. Those weren't hers to sell. They belonged to our family, to memories we could never get back. Yet here she was, trading them for cash like they were worthless trinkets. That night, unable to sleep, I wandered into the hallway and overheard another conversation between her and Brad. They must have thought everyone else was asleep because their voices carried clearly through the thin walls. "The old man's weak," Brad muttered. "He won't last much longer. Once he's gone, this place will be ours." She laughed, a cold, hollow sound. "Exactly. Then we'll finally have everything we deserve." Their words cut deeper than any knife. Deserve? After abandoning us, after lying and scheming, how dare she think she deserved anything? I leaned against the wall, my heart pounding so loudly I feared they might hear it. My mind raced with images of Dad lying sick in bed, of Ollie struggling to understand why his mother hated him, of all the sacrifices we'd made to survive. And now she wanted to take even that away from us. No, not while I'm still breathing. For the rest of the night I lay awake, plotting. I needed proof, something concrete to expose her for the fraud she was. The photo I'd taken of her tampering with the safe was a start, but it wasn't enough. Over the next few days I began gathering evidence. Bank statements she left lying around, receipts from her extravagant purchases, even recordings of her conversations when she didn't know I was listening. Each piece felt like another nail in her coffin. By the time I finished, I had a file thick with betrayal. All that was left was to decide when, and how, to use it. The morning Dad collapsed on the construction site started like any other. He kissed Ollie goodbye, ruffled my hair, and left before sunrise, his shoulders hunched against the biting cold. It was a routine we'd grown used to, one that had become as predictable as the sun rising in the east. But this time it ended differently. I'll never forget the phone call. The foreman's voice was shaky, almost apologetic, but the words hit me like a freight train. "It's your dad," he said. He collapsed. "We're taking him to the hospital now." Ollie clung to my arm as we rushed to the hospital, his small hands trembling. By the time we arrived it was too late. They told us he'd suffered a massive stroke while carrying heavy beams at the site. His body, already worn down by years of overwork, couldn't take any more. Standing there in the sterile white hallway, staring at the closed doors behind which they'd pronounced him dead, I felt something inside me crack open. All those nights he'd worked himself to exhaustion for us, all those sacrifices he'd made to keep our family together, it was gone now. Just like that. Mom didn't cry until people were watching. She showed up at the hospital hours later, dressed impeccably in black, her face streaked with perfectly applied tears. For a brief moment I thought maybe, just maybe, she felt some remorse. But then came the funeral. Dad's coffin sat solemnly in the center of the room, surrounded by flowers and photos from happier times. People murmured condolences, their voices low and somber. Mom played her part well, dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief and leaning into Brad for support. But as soon as the service ended, she dropped the act. "Where's the insurance money?" she demanded, cornering the lawyer handling Dad's will. "How long does it take to transfer funds these days?" Her words echoed in the quiet room, sharp and jarring. Ollie flinched beside me, his wide eyes darting between her and me. I clenched my fists so tightly that my nails dug into my palms, drawing blood. How dare she? How could she stand there talking about money when Dad's body was barely cold? But that wasn't the worst of it. A few days later, while going through Dad's papers, I found something that made my stomach churn. A document transferring ownership of the house to her. Except the signature at the bottom wasn't Dad's. It was hers, forged with painstaking precision. My mind raced. This was why she'd come back. This was her plan all along, to strip us of everything we had left. I wanted to confront her, to scream at her until my throat bled, but I forced myself to stay calm. Losing control wouldn't help. Not yet. That night, Ollie finally broke down. He sat on the edge of his bed, clutching his knees to his chest, tears streaming down his face. "I miss Dad," he whispered. "And I hate her. Why is she so mean?" Before I could answer, Mom stormed into the room, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. "What's all this crying about?" she snapped, glaring at Ollie. "I don't want you here," he shouted, surprising even himself. "I only need Nate." Her hand moved faster than I could react. The sound of her palm connecting with Ollie's cheek reverberated through the room. He stumbled backward, shock etched across his face. Something inside me snapped. I lunged forward, grabbing her wrist before she could strike again. "Don't you ever touch him," I growled, my voice low and dangerous. She yanked her arm free, sneering. "You think you can stop me? This is my house now. Both of you are nothing without me." Her words hung in the air like poison. I stared at her, hatred burning in my chest. This was the woman who abandoned us, who lied and schemed and manipulated her way back into our lives. And now she dared to claim ownership over what little remained of our family. As she turned and walked away, I realized something. I'd spent years hating her, dreading the day she might return. But now that she was here, standing in front of me, I understood one thing clearly. She wasn't just a ghost from our past anymore. She was a storm I needed to weather one last time. And storms, no matter how fierce, always pass. The days that followed Dad's death were a blur of anger and determination. I didn't have time to grieve, not when her shadow loomed over everything we had left. Every breath I took was fueled by one singular goal: to make sure she never touched our lives again. I started with the evidence I'd been collecting. The forged document transferring ownership of the house, the photo of her tampering with the safe, the receipts from her extravagant purchases, all of it went into a folder that became my weapon. But I knew it wasn't enough. I needed someone who could help me fight this battle in court, someone who understood the law and wouldn't be swayed by her charm or lies. That's when I remembered Mr. Carter, the lawyer handling Dad's will. He wasn't just any attorney, he was an old friend of Dad's, someone who had known our family for years. At first, I wasn't sure if he'd believe me. After all, she had already convinced him that the signature on the document was legitimate. But I couldn't give up. I met him at his office one afternoon, clutching the folder tightly under my arm. "Mr. Carter," I began, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me, "there's something you need to see." He frowned as I laid out the documents in front of him, explaining how I'd found them and what they meant. For a moment he looked skeptical, but then I showed him the photo of her at the safe. His expression shifted, shock, disbelief, and finally resolve. "She's playing you," I said, leaning forward. "Just like she played us. Please, you owe it to Dad to stop her." After a long pause he nodded. "All right, Nate. Let's do this the right way." With his help, I filed a lawsuit challenging the validity of the document. It wasn't easy. She fought back with every resource she had, hiring expensive lawyers and trying to discredit me at every turn. But I held firm, knowing that justice was on my side. The day of reckoning came sooner than I expected. She had planned to move into the house permanently, treating it like her personal palace. Brad stood beside her, smirking arrogantly as movers carried in her designer furniture. "This is where we belong now," she announced, surveying the living room with a satisfied smile. But before she could take another step, there was a knock at the door. When she opened it, 2 police officers stood there, their faces grim. One of them held up a piece of paper. "Ma'am, we have a court order requiring you to vacate this property immediately." Her eyes widened in shock. "What? No. This is my house." "It's not," I said, stepping forward. My voice was cold, unwavering. "This has never been your home. You gave that up the night you walked out on us." She spun around, pointing an accusing finger at me. "You did this. You little brat, you ruined everything." "Everything was ruined the moment you decided we weren't worth staying for," I shot back. Brad tried to intervene, shouting something about appeals and legal technicalities, but the officers cut him off. "Sir, unless you want to join her in handcuffs, I suggest you leave quietly." For a moment she resisted, clinging to the doorframe like a child throwing a tantrum. But eventually they pulled her away, her screams echoing through the neighborhood. As she was dragged down the steps, still wearing her expensive dress and heels, I felt a strange sense of closure. When the commotion died down, Ollie appeared behind me, his eyes wide but hopeful. "Is it over?" he asked softly. I knelt down, pulling him into a tight hug. "Yeah, buddy. It's over." He buried his face in my shoulder, murmuring words I thought I'd never hear again. "I only need you, Nate." Tears welled up in my eyes, but these were different. They weren't tears of pain or loss. They were tears of relief, of triumph, of love. We'd survived. Together. As we stood there in the doorway watching the movers pack her things back into the truck, I realized something. She might have taken so much from us, but she could never take away what truly mattered, our bond. Our family. And for the first time in years I allowed myself to hope.